Welcome to the webinar, and today it's going to be about hiring producers, finding the salespeople that get and generate results. Well, it's brought to you by our Smart Center, QCSS, and Green Professionals, along with the Samurai Business Group. I am Bob Lambert, founding partner of Samurai Business Group. Had a family emergency, so I'm taking over. So we're going to have a lot of fun. As we go through this webinar, I'd like for you to take and write down your questions till we come to the end, and we'll have a little Q&A session afterwards. There will be some exercises put in through here for you to be thinking about. So when we come to those, I'll be asking you some basic questions as to your process and your hiring so that you can take and write down some questions and your thoughts as to how you're doing that currently. One of the things about this is one of the most critical decisions that you're ever going to make as far as hiring goes is going to be for your sales organization. And as you can see in the slide, one of the things that a lot of people can't answer the real question is, how much does it cost you for a bad hire? We know that statistically and through research done by a marketing professor, Gilbert Churchill, that we work with at DePaul University, that oftentimes a bad hire exceeds $100,000 lost opportunity. And also one of the common mistakes is carrying a salesperson longer than their mother did. And that's a little pun on our part, but we really espouse that when you hire people, you should have a critical path for their success. And that will be a little something that we cover later on through the presentation. 50% of salespeople are in the wrong line of work. And actually that statistic we've seen recently is a little bit higher than that. Part of that is just a mismatch, and folks that are either that what they're getting themselves into, or oftentimes it's a mismatch from a cultural fit and also their skills and talents. Necessary personalities, it's not about personalities. It's really about some other critical factors that we're going to be discussing through the webinar. Obviously a personality for or proclivity for sales is certainly something that's important. Somebody having the right attitude, the abilities also to do that, again, depending upon what the sales role. Lack of emotional and psychological makeup are required also, because you've got to have a thick skin to be in sales, particularly when you're a hunter, and being able to handle rejection, let it roll off your back, and move on to the next thing. Thin-skinned people don't make it very long in sales, mainly because of the simple fact that they take it personally. And it is personal to a certain degree, but you got to be able to have the mental toughness and the emotional toughness to move on when things aren't going to work out. Most hiring is done by the same managers. That also causes a bit of a problem when you're hiring, because of the simple fact that you get into a rut. If there are bad managers or they're bad folks that are hiring, oftentimes what we find is they're hiring people like themselves, or that they have a certain bias towards certain people. That isn't necessarily a good way to do as far as hiring for salespeople. Unless the manager can hire, you're going to know what you get, and that is it's an impossibility to manage effectively. So again, having those traits and those talents and those abilities to hire, which is one of the most critical positions and most critical requirements of a sales manager. Being able to hire good people, hire effectively, hire producers. Then the next aspect of that is, how do you coach them? How do you develop them? How do you bring them along? How do you really nurture those salespeople into being top guns for your organization? There's some more statistical information for you that follows the hiring process and some of the results that you get out of that. Interviews only, there's only about a 50% success rate for interviews only. So in other words, you're not doing anything other than interviewing people for a sales role. Interviews plus a behavioral assessment increases your rates of success by up to 50%. And then last but not least, interviews, assessments, focus on driving. The interview process in and of itself is critical to this. We call behavioral interviews. Behavioral assessments coupled with a good behavioral interview and a focus on the drive in your culture, you now have an 85% success rate in making those kind of hires. Now, the important thing to keep in mind here also is is from the statistical information, some of the studies and the research that's being one of the most critical positions to hire for in a company, that translates also into your success rate as far as the company goes when your frontline salespeople have a high degree of the factors and the characteristics that we're looking for to become successful within your organization. Every organization is different, and every organization has its own culture, which is part of what you have to really take in and be really focused on that you're looking for. Individuals drive, their personality, their particular motivation, their value systems are also going to be extremely important as to how they represent your company. What I'd like for you to do now is I want you to think about what is your current hiring process. Think about what it is that you put together for your current hiring process. Most of the folks that we work with, frankly, when they're asked this question, are hiring process, particularly for salespeople. So having a well thought out hiring process of what you're going to take them through. Now this is going to be all the way from how do you screen people through, how do they even apply for the position, as to who you have doing the screening, well into then, once you get through the screening process, what other things are you doing then to actually get down to taking the time and the energy to actually interview these folks? So that might take in pre-screening assessment tools that you're using. How versed are you at good behavioral questions and good behavioral interview style? That doesn't necessarily it takes into getting down underneath the covers, particularly for salespeople. Understand something. Some of the best sales that a salesperson is going to make is getting hired. There's an expression that we use oftentimes. We hired Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito showed up to work. So take it for what it is. Next question I'd like for you to ask yourself during this section is strengths for the weaknesses of the people that you're going to be looking at, okay? And then what steps to be added or improved. So also you have to look at that also, the strengths and the weaknesses of you, if you're the one that's interviewing, whoever it might be in your HR department, however you're using it and what people you're using as far as that process goes. What are their strengths and weaknesses? So even a good assessment testing of those folks as to their capability and how to do this. Now, again, this is nothing negative on what, frankly, they're not hiring it all the time. They're not in that process all the time. So this becomes a process that becomes, catch as catch can, situational. One of the strongest things I'm an advocate of is that you are hiring all the time. You're looking for candidates on a constant basis. I used to carry a book around with me, a little journal around with me all the time. And what that journal had in it was basically candidates or people that I've run across that I wanted to consider to hire down the road. If I ran across somebody who was exceptional, had a blank ads or looking for salespeople, I had a book that I always went back to. The other thing, too, is in talking with associates and colleagues and competitors and all that, is to find out who are the people that have a great reputation out there. Who are the people that your buyers, consider to be good salespeople or good advocates for their company. That's another great resource and a way to take and vet people and look at them. We always look at putting it out to our network as to people that we trust and that we know who they might suggest for a sales role within our company. One of the weaknesses we believe is just solely picking out and hiring from competitors. And the biggest lie that's ever told in most of these things, 95% of this never happens, I'll bring my book of business with me, okay? That is the big lie. It just doesn't happen. Statistically, that just doesn't happen. When you think about that, you're selling for one company, you're an advocate for it, you're telling your buyer that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then all of a sudden you're going to make a move over to another company. Now you're telling the buyer something else. Oh, now this one's better. The other thing is how much unraveling or unpacking does that buyer have to do to go with you now and switch? And that's where the other big aha moment becomes, is that oftentimes they're not going to upset the apple cart. If it was working for them and things were going well, being a salesperson that there's going to have to be some things that are going wrong. And oftentimes that's where good salespeople do leave, and they will take their customers, is because something is happening with the company that they're working for. It could be a merger, acquisition, any one of a number of things can be happening. Poor quality of product, all of a sudden there's been some changes internally. So it's a lot of stuff that might be out of that salesperson's control as far as what they're delivering and the quality of that would maybe prompt them to go down the road. Obviously, if they're being offered a big bag of money to do that also, yeah, change. They'll make a switch. So what's the key criteria for a good hire? Well, obviously, it's the ability to do the job. Particularly when you start looking at young people today, are they showing up? Are they going to show up for work? How do they show up when they're going to be interviewed? Is that a niche area that you want to have a developmental program where you're bringing young people on and you're going to be able to develop them into your sales organization? A lot of considerations have to be taken in for that also in criteria. Are they willing to do the job? Now, you'd have to sit there and say, well, gee, anybody that's interviewing is willing to do the job. That's not so, okay? They may be willing just to get the job in the first place so that they can get some kind of income out of it. The fit with the current staff, huge. Are these people, is this person going to be a fit with us? Culturally, value-wise, motivation, all those kind of things you have to take in consideration. So you have to be thinking about that. What is your culture? What is your fit? When somebody finds a good fit for your company, are you able to articulate that? And I mean articulate that in real discernible ways that, you can put it on a piece of paper. So what I'd encourage you to think about is the criteria for a hire, ability to do the job, what's that mean to you? The willingness to do the job, what's that mean to you? And also, what's your current staff, what's your fit? Next is going to be a fit with the environment. Now the environment has to do, when we'll get back in the presentation, get into that a little bit more now, as to what does that mean? What's the environment that these times we see somebody from one, put them into a different kind of an environment. They may be successful in that first environment and they fail in the second environment. There's a lot of reasons for that, and we're going to go through that a little bit later as to what that looks like. And then once on the job, manageability once on the job. A lot of that has to do with your onboarding process. What is it that you're looking to do, and how much support is this person going to get when they come on? If you believe that they're going to be able to hit the ground running and they're going to just be 100% from day one when they come in, I think you're being a little bit short-sighted about that. That's where oftentimes things fail. Well, he was a big success. She was a big success at company A. Now coming into our company, we expect them to perform at that level. They're going to hit the ground running, and within 90 days, they're going to have a fabulous pipeline, and they're going to be just knocking the ball out of the park. Good luck with that. I hope that happens for you. Probably less than 1% of the time that will happen. I know of cases like that, but that's from all the things we're talking about above. And they were able to do that because of reputation or things that they had been doing prior. Could be just good old-fashioned horsepower. They just stick to it. They're really motivated. They're really getting after it. And also a good, healthy dose of luck, ladies and gentlemen. There's a lot of that that's also baked into this too, okay? But nothing is a substitute for people that are prepared. Also that they have the horsepower intellectually to do the job. That's one of the things too that we find oftentimes is that if the position requires a little bit higher intellect, I'm not suggesting that they have to be A+ students or they have to score, 32 on their SATs or anything like that. It's often been found also for hires that have very high intellectual capacity but don't have the emotional wherewithal fail. So they might be brilliant at what they do or their intellectual horsepower, but when it comes to their interpersonal relationships and being able to walk and chew gum, oftentimes they cannot adapt to that or do that properly. Because again, we're dealing with human beings here, not machines. So, good hire equals a good fit. Spending the time and the energy up front to make sure that you have the criteria down, what you're looking for, the kind of folks that you're looking for, and also having a good handle on what's going to be a fit for you. So good hire equals good fit. I can't emphasize that enough because oftentimes that's ignored because they look good on a piece of paper, they talk good in the interview, get them in the, it's not such a good fit. And before you know it, we're going down the road to disaster for them and for you. As you saw before, what the average cost is for a bad hire is $100,000. I don't know about you. I don't know too many companies they're willing to give tossing around $100,000 at a crack just because they don't really understand what they're doing, or more importantly, which is often a bad situation, is that the candidate thinks that it's a good fit for them. Everything down. Top performers here in the slide are a product of their environment. So again, think very carefully about your environment, what a candidate is going to need to look like to fit in with your culture, with your organization, to really give them and set them up for success. Oftentimes when I'm working with managers, I have to help them to understand part of their job is setting those people up for success, not the other way around. Oftentimes management is into a negative spin. It's about the things you're not doing right. It's constant criticism. It's knocking people down. That's not a good environment for people to be in, especially if you want to nurture them and grow them and turn them into top producers. The top companies right now in their cultural fit with people, and they're very selective about this, they're very careful about how they hire. They are top companies for specifically that reason. They hire for their culture. They hire for a lot of the criteria we've already talked about, and they set people up for success. They get the rails right. A lot of that has to do with the onboarding process, what kind of support they're going to get afterwards, what's the training in the environment that they're in. Are they going to have coaches and mentors along the way that are going to help them, that encourage them? If you have a high-producing candidate that comes in already hitting the ground, what kind of things do they need as far as support goes? By way of example, you hire a candidate out of a Fortune 500 company. Oftentimes they have a tremendous amount of support around an ecosystem. Now all of a sudden they're in a mid-market company and you think, hey, these are going to be great because they're working for XYZ company and they're a top company, top culture, and then they come into your organization. They don't have the same support or the ecosystem around them, and all of a sudden they're now faced with doing a lot of things that they aren't used to doing or had to do before. Again, that's going to be a situation that you really have to ferret out and make sure that they're going to be able to be a fit in your organization for the other things that they're going to maybe have to do that they weren't used to doing before. Obviously, this has been covered, the right candidate for your organization. So, can and will are different for. And then secondly, are they willing to do the job? Okay. In the can section here, basically we're going to cover do they have the skills necessary? What kind of skills does a candidate to work for your organization need to be a good candidate? More importantly, to be a successful in your organization. What knowledge do they need to possess? Again, if it's a technical kind of a sale, if it's a technical and very complex type of a sale, what kind of knowledge do they need to bring to the table ahead of time? Also, at what level are they in, as far as their sales maturity? If you're looking for somebody that is a mature candidate, a mature salesperson, then obviously they have to have a specific knowledge, particularly for your industry. Let's just say it's the healthcare industry, and in your healthcare industry you have some very specific things, knowledge and requirements that they need to have. Then obviously that's where you're going to need to draw your candidates from. What we sometimes is that particularly top companies hire for attitude. The knowledge and the rest of the skill sets that they're going to need to require oftentimes can be taught to them. One of the other things too that I would share with you is don't confuse product and service knowledge with skill training. I talk with a lot of companies and they say, yeah, we've got a great training program. And I say, well, tell me about your training program. And what they're telling me about is the training that they're given is product. Vast majority of it. You need to have that. That's what the buyer's going to expect. But on the other side of that, they shortchange the skill training that's required to be able to have an interface and interactivity with another human being. It's one thing if you're selling stuff over the internet and there's not much human intervention. When you start talking about long, protracted sales, multiple people in the decision process, more complex, higher value, and also a higher decision point in the company, you're going to have the ability to understand the skill and have the skills to be able to interface with multiple people, multiple personalities within that organization, and most importantly, understanding what's in it for them, because it's about them, it's not about you. And that's the other thing that gets confusing. When you start jamming a lot of product knowledge and service knowledge into people, then all of a sudden they become subject matter experts. Instead of asking great questions and listening to the buyers, to what the buyers' requirements are, all of a sudden they're selling, and if they're telling, and if they're telling, they're selling. the last thing you want to have happen. The last thing on here is intelligence. What kind of intelligence is required for them to be successful in what the product or services that you're offering? Some sales are highly transactional. One or two calls and it's done, whether they're going to take it or not. May not require a great deal of intelligence. It's going to require, though, some skills and things that, as far as drive and sticking with it and making the calls and getting through to people and so on and so forth. On the other hand, if you're looking at something scientific or something in the bioscience, then you really have to take that in consideration as to can they do the job. And that might require then some testing and assessments on their intelligence and their capability that way. Next, we want to talk about will. So we talked about can, now will. This is extremely important. Will they do this? Will they be able to be a fit? And that has to do with, first, number one is drive. Do they have the internal drive to get up every morning to drive decisions that, prospect, to make that one more call that day? What is their drive? What's the motivation for these people? And oftentimes in a good behavioral interview, you really want to have good behavioral questions that will pull that out of somebody. What gets them up in the morning? What keeps them going? What keeps them working past 6 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock at night? What are the kind of things that they need to be doing? What is their value system? What do they value? It can't be all about money. But drive does, all top salespeople are driven by some motivation, and money is in the top three, okay? Number two, then, is the environment that they're going to place in. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. Will they be a fit? Do they see themselves as a fit? Are you being articulate about what's going to be expected of them, what kind of environment it is, what their coworkers are like, what you as a manager's expectation is going to be, and then what management period is going to be expecting of their sales organization or does expect of their sales organization? And you are driven by quarterlies and numbers are everything. So what's going to happen with that when they're not making their numbers, and what's the expectation going to be around that? Is their position going to be in the line? What's the consequence of not making their number? What kind of accountability have you got baked into what it is that they're going to be doing? And again, that has to do with their drive. Highly successful, motivated salespeople have a great degree of drive. They have personal drive, personal motivation, personal gain that they look at as to what they're going to get. That could be money, and money certainly is a measurement and a standard by which top salespeople go by. But after a certain point in time, money no longer is the big drive. It might be awards. It might be accolades. It might be in the top guy in their profession or top gal in their profession. That's what their juice is. Because, again, after a certain point, after Maslow's theory has been, food, shelter, and clothing has been met, now what's above that? And what's really going to drive them through to be the best of the best? Here's a piece of drive. Competitive. Competitiveness is one of the top-rated things. And we also look at, from a competitive standpoint, what was their background? Recently, I've had an opportunity to talk to a couple hiring managers and top sales professionals that I know, and managers. And one of the things that they're looking at now from the standpoint of the millennials and their background is they're going all the way back into high school. And one of the things that they found is being the people they are hiring is a couple things. Number one, did they work when they were in high school at a legitimate job, making money, and the discipline of that? Number two, then, was did they play a team sport? They didn't have to be a top athlete. They didn't have to be, an award winner or anything like that. But were they competitive? And what that brings along the line is both from the standpoint that they had to drive to get a job and working in high school. And what was the money used for? Why were they doing that job? Did they like the job? Did they have to show up in time? What was their attendance record? Is there anybody who can vouch for them as far as how they were as an employee showing up? How they interact with the rest of the employees that they were working with. Same thing as far as team sport. As you can know, in a team sport, it takes a lot of discipline. You're expected to show up. You're expected to be there on time. You're expected to take coaching. So that also is another indicator here, possible indicator, as to the characteristics of the drive. The other thing, too, as you can imagine, in team sport or in achievement, are they somebody that needs or they come across or they show that they are achievers, that they have achieved in their, in their lifetime? Again, depending upon what you're hiring for, mature, a middle, stage person or a brand new to the sales role, what is the achievements that they have. Everybody's got something that they're proud of. And finding those things out will be extremely important as you go through the interviewing and selection process. The last is are they optimistic? Do they have a positive outlook on their life, on things in general, and how do they manifest that? Can they give you examples of how they are optimistic? If it's raining out, if it's a gray day, what do? If they get rejection or something happened bad during the day, what do? They turn tail and run, go to the bar, or hang out with their friends, or do they just drive through it? Are they going to be able to take and look at that and say, okay, that didn't work in him, get on. Those are the kind of things that you really want to look for with somebody that's high drive or has that drive and achievement. Now, again, depending upon the role that you're looking for, is this going to be a high producer, a hunter type, or are we looking at a farmer? Somebody that's going to nurture and develop a relationship that's already been established, take it deeper and wider, and that's what their juice is. That's what they're about. Again, what's their competitive set? What makes them of their drive if they're a farmer? Are they competitive? Do they have a need to achieve? Achieve might just be accolades and praise from the client, that they just love working with them. It might be that the management recognizes that they really have built a client from, let's say, $100,000 to $1 million. Is that something that drives them, that they feel good about it? Oftentimes for farmers, what they feel the best about and they're most optimistic about is the relationship with the clients today. Because it's one thing to be a hunter, dragging them in by the hair, getting the deal done, and then walking on to the next thing, which most of your hunters want to do. They don't really want to stick around babysitting a client that much. There are hybrids of that. But your account management people, the people that are your farmers, they're going to go deep and go wide and really pound the furrow and plant the seeds and water them and nurture them and growing. Again, those are folks that also have a degree of drive, but you just got to tap into that and understand it. So here we go again with what are you hiring for? What is that position? And then couple that with mental toughness. You got to deal with unique emotional psychological challenge inherent to the sales environment. I can't tell you how many times I've had the opportunity to coach and train sales organizations, salespeople that have got a high degree of mental toughness. They can work through it. They drive through it. They don't let it get them down. They don't let it make it, their performance suffer. Obviously, everybody goes through a bad season. You look at sports, particularly like baseball, where they go through a bad slump. You hear about pitcher slump or hitter slump, okay? Mental toughness kicks in when they can work through that. They work harder. They get more training. They do what's needed and necessary to get through that, to drive through that particular emotional downturn or the psychological downturn. They don't let it get them down for very long. They bounce back. That's another thing that you can, again, through a good behavioral interview, sort out. Tell me about a time when you're really down, when things weren't working out for you. What did you do? Okay? What kind of things motivate you? What kind of things do you... Tell me the last time that you did something to sharpen the saw as far as somebody that's mid-career or a top professional. What you find with them is they're constantly sharpening the saw. They're constantly doing things that are going to improve them or make them better. And these are the kind of things that you want to also find out. Environment. Multiple studies, as it says here, have shown that sales environment is a critical factor to the success of the salesperson as the person's sales skills. And one of the things that's great with this, as far as the environment goes, is a little bit of a pictorial here. And what that is, on the left here, you have a cheetah. On the right, you have a mountain lion. Obviously, the similarity between these two are they're large cats. They're predators. They're hunters. But on the left, your cheetah, what is your cheetah's environment? Your cheetah's environment is basically on the savanna, in Africa, or open plains. How do they hunt? They hunt oftentimes in groups or packs, but they also hunt basically by speed. So they chase down their, the prey, and come up and either will pull them down like an antelope. They'll grab a leg or something like that, but they can match the speed. As they pull them down, then of course, then what kicks in then is the kill instinct and how they go about doing that. On the right-hand side, you've got a mountain lion or a puma. What's their environment? Well, it's hilly terrain, right? You can see there by their paws and what they're about. They're much more muscular than the cheetah. And how do they hunt? They hunt, generally speaking, by surprise and from behind, up in the mountain, going after goats and other animals will be hanging up there, deer. And because of their muscle structure and their power, they overpower the prey. Now, what do you think would happen if we took and interchanged the environment these two were in? What if we put a cheetah in a mountainous terrain? How well do you think they would survive based on the hunting skills and what I told you about how they hunt on the open plain and the savanna where they use their speed to chase down their prey? The mountain lion, take that mountain lion and put him out in the savanna. He's not used to long-term speed and keeping that up, the capability. Also, can he even get to that kind of speed to hunt the prey down or to catch them? So this is the analogy that we use when we start talking about the environment that your hunters are going to be in. What's the environment that they're going to be in? So like I said before, if you've got a high-performing hunter, and let's just say it was the cheetah, and their territory is that plain, and all of a sudden we put them into a mountainous terrain like the mountain lion, and how well are they going to be able to perform in that terrain? That's probably the best analogy I can give you. We also have an assessment tool that uses these kinds of environments in this kind of animal structure to help you understand the environment that they're a little bit later. Factors that we have to take in consideration here. The nature of the sales role, inside sales or outside sales. Okay. Nature of the sale, transactional or consultative. What do I mean by that? Is this the kind of sale from a transactional standpoint, one or two closes or one or two calls and it's going to be a close? By way of example, if I'm buying something for my home, if I'm going to be thinking about a new roof of my home, I'm going to call in 3 or 4 different vendors for that or companies. Likely if my roof's leaking, as to who am I going to use for this. So that becomes more of a transactional sale. 1 are done, 2 are done, and then that's where and you get on with it pretty quickly. You're going to know if it's a sale or not. Versus a longer, more complex kind of a sale where it takes in consultative. There might be multiple decision makers in that sale. Oftentimes in B2B they are that, a little bit more complex versus a consumer sale. And also particularly much more complex if it's a service versus a product. That's another factor in here that you got to look at about the nature of the sale. And then the nature of the offering, as we say below, is simple. Packaged products or complex customized products or services. And again, the illustration I made before was, what are you buying? So if it's something that you're making determination on, quality and price or price only, that might be a simple sale. And then again, what is that product? If it's more complex or customized products or services, and particularly services, okay, there's a lot more that has to be considered, in that environment. Is this new business or is this add-on business? Again, as we said before, hunter versus farmer. You have to look at those characteristics. And then the nature of the compensation, big. Commission only, salary plus commission, salary only, salary with a little bit of commission. There's all kinds of different structures as far as the compensation goes. I have yet to see a perfect compensation plan or an incentive program. Most of my experience, particularly when people can break these things down within 15 minutes to a half an hour, and they can game the system. So you better have a good understanding of what motivates, what drives your salespeople to accomplish what they're trying to do. I think some of the worst compensation programs that I've ever seen was that there were so many outside factors, it was so complicated for them to even think through that they basically just gave up. The other ones are weighted more toward your top people, and then everybody else suffers. Let's face it, the old 80-20 rule is live sales. About people on the average or less are doing about 80% of the business. What you want to do is move that bell curve to where you've got more of your people spreading that out. You think about that. If you got one top talented person or a couple of them that count for 80% of your sales, what's the impact of that when you lose them or something, God forbid, happens to them and takes them out of the game? Now you're in real trouble. You got too few eggs in the basket. So you really got to be thinking about that. And again, compensation, I'm not going to get into a great detail of that, but factor in here in the environmental factor as to what is going to be happening. What was the kind of compensation they were making before? What was it based on? What were the requirements that they had to do that? The simpler you can keep this, the old theory of KISS, keep it simple, is alive and well when it comes to comp plans. You also incent the behavior that you want them to do, okay? So what's that mean? If I have a situation where I have high margin products and they're more difficult to sell, then guess what? I might want to put a higher commission on those products to get their attention to drive a performance on higher margin product. If I have a lower margin product, then I might want to structure my comp plan to where it ramps over a period of time so that if it's an easy sale, then there would be a longer ramp period until it kicks up into the next commission structure, or that I would increase the commission structure. So there's a lot of variables when you start thinking about this, and also what, again, was the candidate used to from an environmental standpoint. So you got to think about the nature of the sales channel. Is this a direct sale? Are they going to be calling directly on customers, and that's part of what they have to do? The prospecting, ferreting these out, who are they going to get to, how are they going to get to them, versus an indirect sale. And that is working through agents, working through what's called value-add resellers, working through brokers. That's another part of the consideration you have to think about as to how are they going to be managing the sale and the sales channels that they're going to be involved with. It's business development versus, again, customer service. Now, there's a blend. There's hybrid in all of this. You want them to be customer-centric, particularly your hunters, because in the end game, that's who people are going to buy from. People that they trust, that they feel secure and safe with, that are going to do what they say they can do. So there's going to be a certain amount of that a hunter has to have the ability that evokes confidence in the buyer that they're going to do, and they're going to be able to pull off what they say they can do. On the other side of that thing is you can't have them too focused on it. They're going to be spending too much time on that kind of consideration versus going out and getting the next piece of business for you. So again, there's hybrids and everything, and there's people, this is again an environmental factor that you have to take in consideration, and also about their background. What's their history? What's their performance? What have they done before? What kind of environments were they in? Did they have to do these kind of things before? And does that match up with your culture, your environment, what the requirements are for the folks that you're going to be hiring? In this exercise, what I would like for you to consider is events or experience that's important to you. How they present themselves, how much you like them. The sales skills. Do you interview for drive, mental toughness, and whether or not they would be a fit for your environment? So those are the kind of things that I would like for you to just get hard and fast with. Ask yourself about these things. How much of it important is their past achievements and experience? How important is it for them how they present themselves and how you like them? And then, of course, their sales skills. Not so much product or service knowledge, but sales skills. It's that's soft skills. It's basically how they interact with you, and also how they describe that and give you examples of how they interact with people. It might be, give me an example of a time when you got into a customer and you got into an awkward situation, and what'd you do about it? How do you handle objections? How do you handle a situation where the buyer is not respectful of you or your time? There's all kinds of things that you can do as far as good behavioral questions and how people react to those things. Again, remember, salespeople are extremely good at telling you what you want to hear. So you really have to be able to get these skills down, ask great behavioral questions of people to get what it is that can explain some of these things to you. All right. Reasons for the process. Well, obviously, eliminates reliance and subjectivity. Oftentimes what we find is sales managers or hiring managers are hiring because, oh, you went to Notre Dame, so did I. Okay, so you're a kinship. I have an affinity to you. You're in. It's a lock. Might be just simply that they like sports or any one of a couple of affinity points, and all of a sudden that makes them a great candidate. That's also one of the things that is one of the biggest red flags that I see with a lot of hiring managers. It's based on that kind of subjectivity instead of really going through a good process. There's an old adage in hiring, hire slow, fire quickly. What I would highly recommend to all of you listening today is take that to heart. Take your time. And that's another reason why I kept a journal. because at any given time when something starts to happen and you need to make a hire, being in a rush to make a hire is when I've made some of the worst decisions I've ever made in hiring. Because I was under pressure, I was just trying to put a button seat, somebody would fog a mirror, and those are bad hires. So take your time with this, and don't get in a rush, and don't put yourself in a position where all of a sudden you're in an urgent, dire situation, you have no candidates, and all of a sudden you're just hiring somebody. You'll find out that you'll rue the day that happens. Cover all the bases, okay? Making sure you think through this, that you're well prepared before you start hiring or looking at candidates or interviewing them. Provides managers and increases your success rate. The most successful companies that we work with in their culture basically adopt these types of processes. They have a firm process, and everybody's on board. They also do multiple interviews. They do team interviews. So that's another thing that I would strongly recommend. Your gut might be telling you that, hey, this is a great hire. You checked all the boxes. Learn against somebody else. And also, what I always found for me is one of my coaches and mentors recommended me early in my career was get a dark cloud on your team. What's that mean? Somebody that thinks the opposite of you, and they will take issue with whatever it is that you say, not to be mean-spirited, but for you to make you think. So, in your organization, all I would share with you is, do you have a dark cloud? Do you have somebody that takes an opposite view of what you do, and for a lot of good reason, they can justify that, but that might be also a good barometer or a weather vane for you to check your, how you're doing as far as the subjectivity in this kind of a hire. And the increase the rate, as you saw from the DePaul study, from 15% to 85% success rate when you take and have a process that we outlined before. There's a few rules of thumb that you want to be able to go through. Interview at least 3 candidates. I'm not a big fan of looking at 10 candidates or interviewing 10 candidates. You need to be able to look at the selection. Cause a lot of confusion for you when you're doing this whole process. The other thing is involve multiple people, as I said before. Focus on the intangibles. Again, the skills, the stuff that the relational things. Focus on those things as to how well they perform and how well, and also their background, what have they done in that area. Past behaviors. Although past behaviors are in no way a significant of what their future behaviors are going to be, but the big factor there is, again, going to be the environment. Don't just think just because they were successful in one area that they'll be successful with you. However, behaviors are a good indicator as to how they behave, how they go through process, how they think. And never hire to fill a slot. I just gave you a great example of that earlier as to the pitfall of doing something like that. If you have any doubts whatsoever, if your gut is telling you there's something wrong here, pass. The other thing I would do, which I see companies not doing as well as they should, is spending the money, making the investment in background checks. It's really important. And I mean background checks from a national standpoint, not just local. We have a very successful company that we've coached and trained that does that. And it's interesting how they shared with me some of the things that they have found in background checks that a lot of employers don't really pay attention to or haven't even asked them for. And the successful companies, again, a bad hiring decision here and a mistake, particularly for something that's in somebody's past that isn't revealed to you because they don't have to reveal it to you and you don't check it out, can be a disaster, both from the standpoint of the hire but also maybe negative publicity or a lot of other things that can come along with that. Hiring process, step 1, develop a pool of candidates, as I said before. This is a continuous process. All top managers that I know in companies that are very successful continually develop a pool of candidates for themselves. They have a clear criteria in what they're looking for, and they're always on the lookout for top candidates. Develop a job description. Again, you can't go winging this. Have a good, well-developed job description. If you don't know how to do it or you think you don't know how to do it, hire somebody to do it for you. There's a lot of HR professionals out there, and particularly sales management that's out there right now that might be sitting on the bench or do some consulting work. It's worth the time and the money to invest in those people to help you. And then develop the ideal candidate profile. You got to know what you're looking for. It's kind of like going out in the woods hunting. You know, do you hunt for duck out in the middle of the woods? Well, if it's a wood duck, yeah. But generally speaking, they're going to be in the ponds. They're going to be in the rivers. You're going to be looking for them in lakes, not out in the middle of the woods. So again, this is the same thing here. It's what are you looking for? Where do they hang out? What do those candidates look like? Step 4, you got to screen their resumes. Again, you go through the preliminary screening, telephone, and then conduct a functional behavioral interviews as we emphasized before. We highly recommend after that perform a candidate assessment. There's lots of assessment tools out there, but once you whittle the field down, now you can take and invest in a good assessment tool to see, to ferret out more about that candidate. Then you want to conduct the follow-up interviews with the candidate, recruit, select the candidate, and then of course the onboarding process. I can't emphasize that enough. This is oftentimes you spend all this time, this energy, and time is money to find the ideal candidate, to recruit the candidate, and then you just throw them into the deep end of the pool and don't even give them a set of floaties. Okay, you're working for us now. Here you go. Here's your computer. Here's the the list of people you got to call. Have at it. And then you have great expectation of them that they're just going to knock it out of the park. Well, again, good luck. What I'd like for you to consider in this exercise is these questions. Process. What are the strengths and weaknesses of that hiring process? And then what steps are needed to add or be improved? How well is that working? So it's not to sit there and say, hey, what you're doing is wrong. But I would suggest to you, how can you improve it? What are the things, as you've seen through this presentation, were some of the top things, the top companies that recruit and hire top candidates for their sales organization doing? As you can see, most of these steps are common sense. You know, there was nothing here that was overly complicated or said, wow, gee, I didn't know that. The fact of the matter is, most people do not take this kind of time and effort just to think through the process and get a process and be able to follow it. And by the way, anybody that's going to be interviewing, make sure that everybody understands what this process is, that they get it, they understand it, they know what's expected of them. And again, as I say, run it by other people. Check your gut. Have multiple people taking a look at this. Oftentimes in an organization, we highly recommend that the candidate get with other people that are in your organization, okay? And give their impression of what they are, but give them clearly the kind of things that you're looking for them to ask questions of, good behavioral questions, and the kind of things that might get revealed to a peer that they may not reveal to you, okay? So, this is what it's about, process, what a good hire is. What we'd like to do now is to open it up for some Q&A. And what I'd like also to hear back from you is some lessons learned today. Okay. So we've got the line open now for you to be able to take and type in any of your questions or some of the things that I've given you to think about, and in there. Tom says, okay, Bob, where do I find some of these candidates you're talking about? Well, Tom, what I would say, first of all, go to your network first, okay? Go to your network first. And what I mean by that is, who are your trusted advisors? Who are the people that you care about and trust, that know you, know your business? Who would they recommend to you? It might be your banker. It might be your CPA firm or accounting firm. It may be an attorney. Any one of those folks that you have in your core that could help you with that. Might be a trade association. The other thing is, how about your customers? Who do they recommend? Who are top candidates or top people are calling on them currently? We got Barb here is asking, can you give more examples of a good questions to ask? Absolutely. Thanks, Barb, for your question. there's many questions that you can ask, but what you want to do is we call ask good open-ended Socratic questions. And there's basically how a Socratic question is run is 6 wise men, they tell me everything I knew. What, why, when, where, how, and who. Those would be able to be asked. So by way of example, you might ask a question like, how would you the candidate, let's just say the candidate's name is Dan. Dan, how would you describe a time for me when you had you made a great sale? What did that look like? How did you feel about it? Share with me some of the things that happened during that sale that you're particularly proud of. Might be another question as to what types of things have you done recently to increase your skills or your knowledge for sales. Again, you want people, highly motivated, highly driven candidates in sales are constantly sharpening the saw, and those are the kind of things. Bonnie asked a question here, will this webinar be available for download or viewing later? And the answer is yes. I was unable to, but you will be able to get that. That's a great question that Barb asked for too. Barb, another example might be as to finding out their behaviors. What kind of things do you like to do when you're not working? What are the kind of hobbies, interests, things that you do that you really get excited about? And again, that's pretty telling also of maybe some of the values that they have. Yeah. What do they do? Are they involved in sport, family? Do they involved with their church? What kind of things do they like to do? People that don't have hobbies and interests oftentimes are pretty boring people and can't carry a conversation. Another great question I like to ask people is, what do you read? What types of things do you read? And are they getting that information online? Are they getting that in podcast? Are they getting that good old-fashioned paper? Are they reading like the journal? Are they reading business publications? What is it that they're reading? And the other thing that's very interesting about that, what do you read for leisure? What types of things do you read for leisure? So hopefully that helps you, Barb, as far as some questions that you might ask. Okay, I see we've got another question here from Jim. And Jim is saying, should I use a recruiter? Should I use a recruiter for the selection process? Well, that's kind of a double-edged sword, Jim. As far as I have used recruiters, I would in the position that you're hiring for, oftentimes people use it for one specific reason, as to act as surrogates to go in and recruit in their competitive environment. So in other words, for candidates, because they can't do a direct on assault to that, because all of a sudden that turns into a war. Oh, you're stealing guys from me, I'll go steal guys from you. So oftentimes it's used and set up that way to use them as a surrogate. The other thing too is highly developed and good recruiters are going to be able to pull things out of a candidate. Again, choose them wisely. Not all recruiters are created equal. Obviously, there's the contingency recruiter and there's the retained recruiter. Again, depending upon your situation, your budget, think carefully about that. They also can help you through the process a little bit quicker. But I'd still say that the best recruiting, the best way to find candidates is a couple of the tips that I gave you earlier. Go to your own network. Go to trade associations. Go to your customers. Go to people that you trust and people that you know. The journal, huge. Keep a journal of candidates and people that you think would be good people for you to interview down the road. That always served me very well. I got top candidates oftentimes because I saw them, I saw how they behaved, I asked questions about them with their peers and other people that knew them, and that really was the people that were, to me, were the top candidates that I would get in front of me, then be able to get a little deeper into who they were then on these interviews. Okay, the line's open again. Anybody else out there that wants to ask any other questions? Okay. All righty. I see that we haven't got anybody else on there. Hopefully I did a great job. I'm going to answer all your questions ahead of time. Well, again, we want to thank you for joining us today. This will be available for recording. and that you can download and hear the full webinar. For QCSS and Samurai Business Group, we thank you for joining us today, and hopefully and good recruiting. And get some top candidates out there. Thanks.
Give me Gary Beans's